The bar sat at the edge of a forgotten town, hidden beneath the weight of time and neglect. Faded wooden planks creaked under the pressure of a silent wind, and a flickering neon sign buzzed weakly, spelling out, "Devil's Rest." No one knew why it remained open. No one dared to ask. But on this particular night, 4 strangers stepped inside, seeking shelter from a relentless storm. They were met with a suffocating silence, the air thick with an unspoken history. The bartender, an elderly man with hollow eyes, greeted them with a slow nod. He didn't speak, only pointed toward the booth by the far wall. The strangers, Ethan, a weary traveler, Claire, a journalist chasing urban legends, Marcus, a skeptic with an ironic love for ghost stories, and Jenna, who had been drawn there by something she couldn't explain, settled into their seats, unease tightening around them. "Place gives me the creeps," Marcus muttered, running a hand over the dusty table. Claire smirked. "Maybe we'll get lucky and see a ghost." The bartender placed 4 drinks before them, though no one had ordered. "First round's on the house," he rasped before vanishing into the back. Ethan raised his glass hesitantly, "To new experiences." As they drank, the storm outside intensified. Thunder roared, rattling the windows. And then the stories began. It was Marcus who spoke first, his voice laced with amusement. "All right, since we're in a haunted bar, let's start with a classic. Ever heard of The Man in the Mirror?" Jenna shook her head. Claire leaned forward, intrigued. Marcus grinned. "Legend says there's a mirror in an old speakeasy downtown. If you stare into it long enough, you'll see something standing behind you. A man with no face." "Sounds like a trick of the light," Ethan said. "Maybe," Marcus shrugged. "But those who see him don't live past a week." Jenna shivered. "What happens to them?" "No one knows. They just disappear." The words lingered in the air, merging with the distant rumble of thunder. Then the lights flickered. For a brief moment, the large mirror behind the bar reflected something unnatural, a shadow that wasn't there. No one spoke. Claire was the first to laugh, though it sounded forced. "Well, that was convenient timing." The bartender reappeared, his eyes darker than before. "Some stories should never be spoken aloud." A sharp chill ran through them, but it was already too late. Jenna shifted uncomfortably. "I have a story," she said, her voice hushed. The others turned to her. She hesitated before speaking. "My grandmother used to tell me about a woman who died in a bar just like this. She was waiting for someone, a lover who never came. She sat in the same seat every night, drinking herself into oblivion. And then one night, she just stayed." Claire frowned. "What do you mean, stayed?" Jenna's gaze flickered toward the empty booth near the entrance. "People say she never left, that if you listen closely, you can hear her sobbing." A deep silence followed, and then the sound of quiet weeping echoed through the room. The booth Jenna had pointed to was no longer empty. A woman sat there, her face obscured by shadows. She turned, her eyes hollow, her lips curling into a smile that did not belong to the living. "He's coming," she whispered. The lights went out, and the real horror began. Darkness swallowed the room, thick and impenetrable. The only sound was the storm raging outside, thunder roaring, wind howling, then a whisper, barely audible, but chilling enough to turn blood to ice. "He's coming," the woman repeated, her voice laced with an eerie certainty. Jenna's breath hitched. "Who is coming?" The woman tilted her head, her eyes reflecting something unnatural in the dim light. "The one who never left." A gust of wind swept through the bar, though no doors had opened. The air turned heavy, oppressive. Ethan reached for his phone, but the screen remained black. Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. Then a scrape, a slow, deliberate dragging sound from the far end of the bar. Something was moving. Marcus turned toward the sound, his fingers curling into fists. "This is just some sick joke, right?" His voice wavered. No one answered. Then the emergency lights flickered on, casting long, unnatural shadows. The booth where the woman had sat was empty, but something had changed. The mirror behind the bar no longer reflected them. Instead, it showed the bar as it had been decades ago. Smoke curling in the air, men in worn suits drinking whiskey, laughter echoing from another time. And in the middle of it all, a man stood motionless, his face obscured by darkness, watching them, waiting. The bartender returned, his face pale, his hands shaking as he placed an old leather-bound book onto the counter. "You should leave," he whispered. Claire swallowed. "What is that?" "The bar's ledger." He exhaled slowly. "Every name written inside, never left this place." Jenna hesitated, then flipped the book open. The pages were yellowed, brittle, filled with names scrawled in fading ink. But near the end, the ink grew darker, fresher. Her fingers stopped at the last four names: Ethan, Claire, Marcus, Jenna. A sharp inhale. Number that's not possible. The bartender's eyes glistened with something close to sorrow. "You were chosen the moment you stepped inside." Marcus shoved the book away. "This is bullshit." The bartender didn't flinch. "Then why can't you leave?" Silence. Ethan lunged for the door, gripping the handle, yanking with all his strength. It didn't budge. Claire rushed to the windows, pressing her palms against the cold glass. The storm outside was gone. The street was gone. Nothing but endless darkness beyond the walls. "We're trapped," Jenna whispered. A chuckle drifted through the room, not from any of them, but from the mirror. The man inside had moved. Closer. The bartender placed a trembling hand on the ledger. "There's only one way out." Ethan turned, desperate. "Tell us." The bartender hesitated, then softly, "A sacrifice." Marcus cursed under his breath. "You're insane." The bartender's expression remained grim. "This place demands a soul. It always has. That's how I've survived this long." Claire's stomach twisted. "You mean?" The bartender nodded. "I was once in your place. The only way out is to give the bar what it wants." The realization settled over them like a noose tightening around their throats. Someone had to die. Jenna's voice was barely a whisper. "Who decides?" The mirror rattled violently. The answer was clear. The bar would choose. The mirror's surface rippled like water. A hand pressed against the glass from the other side. Pale, clawed, stretching toward them. And then a name appeared on the ledger in fresh, dripping ink. Marcus. His breath hitched. "Number no. This isn't real." The room darkened. Shadows coiled around his feet. He screamed, lunging for the others, but his body was already fading. His flesh turning to smoke, his voice dissolving into the howling wind. The last thing they saw was his eyes wide with terror before he was gone. The storm outside returned in an instant. The bar trembled. The mirror stilled. The bartender sighed, shoulders slumping. "It is done." The door creaked open. The street outside was back. They were free. But as they stepped out, Jenna stole one last glance at the mirror. The man inside was gone, and Marcus stood in his place, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. The Devil's Rest had claimed another soul, and it was waiting for more.